So the first theory that we're going to cover is phenomenalism, right? And we're going to cover Immanuel Kant's version of phenomenalism. Now, uh, clear warning, there is a bit of contention with regards to whether or not Kant is a phenomenalist or an idealist. Um, my own reading of him is the version that we're covering, and it is a reading that's not necessarily uncommon, but it is certainly the less common interpretation and understanding. Um, Kant as a dualist and therefore as a phenomenalist is something that's supported by the text at large and has a tradition in certainly more so in contemporary Kant commentators and um, experts than in older ones, right? Uh, but both readings are kind of equally supported in various ways. There's a lot of tension, let's say, in Kant's own thought, largely as a product of his poor writing, right? Kant is difficult to read in English. He's near incomprehensible to read in his original German, right? Which certainly doesn't help matters. It makes translation difficult as well. And a big part of that is he's a fan of subjunctive clauses, right? So clauses that modify those that came before, and are dependent upon like understanding those before. In English, you can arrange it so subjunctive clauses are all over the place. In German, each subjunctive clause is successively after the one before, right? So if you have 5 subjunctive clauses, then you have the first independent clause, you read that, and then you have to modify your understanding of that based off of the first subjunctive clause. Then you have to modify your understanding of that based off of the next subjunctive clause, and so on and so forth. And Kant was a man, a monster, really, who had some sentences that lasted a whole page, right? Just filled with 20, 30 subjunctive clauses. So yeah, 2 different readings. We're going with the phenomenalist one. Anyway, all right. So for Kant's version of phenomenalism, he believed that the mind knows the world, all right, as a product of its architectonic structure. Now, architectonic just means it has a defined architecture, right? Um, so all the powers of the mind, all the faculties of the mind, stand within particular relationships to each other, much like the rooms in your house do, right? So imagination stands next to the senses, right? The same way that stands in relation to the senses, the same way that your bathroom is connected to your bedroom, right? You don't get to all the same to the rooms the same way from different places, right? If you're going from like the kitchen to the bathroom, you're going to take a different route than if you're going from, your bedroom to the bathroom or from the living room to the bathroom. And you can kind of tell I might have to go to the bathroom after this particular recording's done. But point being, right, uh, everything stands in a definitive place. How we get from one place to another is a matter of like where things are located in relationship to each other. Similarly, the powers of the mind have kind of set limits, right? They exist a certain way and have certain functions, and they interact with each other in defined ways, right? In defined routes, even. And so this is how the mind works. It has this architectonic structure that allows it to know the world. Right? pretty simple, right? Well, Kant, in his metaphysics, divided the world into two parts, right? Or two types, or two worlds, really. There's the phenomenal world, which is the world known to the mind. And this is everything we experience, from rational thought to the mind's own awareness of itself, to, this lecture right here, through the senses. And then there's the noumenal world. This is the world as it is, absent the mind imposing itself on it, absent the mind knowing it. This is a world we absolutely cannot know. Right? It's the world simply as it exists. Right? Kant called things in this world Ding an sich, right? Which is German for things in themselves, or thing in itself. Right? This is the world as it is without being known. But since the mind is always active, it's always knowing what's around us. Right? The moment we leave a room, the objects in the room go unobserved. Right? They exist as they are, but the mind can't know them that way. Right? The moment we turn back around and go back into the room, the mind's knowing the objects in the phenomenal way. Through the four antinomies and the 12 categories, and it's deciphering everything according to the powers of the mind. Right. So how does this architectonic structure work? Broadly speaking, according to Kant, there are three sources of knowledge, right? And that form kind of just the relationship of the mind to the rest of the world. There is what he calls pure a priori, which is going to be what is known through reason alone. Right? That is by the mind without reference to anything external. Right? It's going to be the mind's own knowledge of itself, the mind's own knowledge of its powers, of reality, right? Logic and logic alone. So it's going to be the sense of the mind's own limits and the sense of the mind's limits of its individual faculties. It's basically going to be the blueprint, right? The structure of the mind. This is everything that's pure a priori is purely logical. And this is separated out from one of Kant's major contributions to philosophy, the idea of the synthetic a priori. Right? The synthetic a priori is going to be what is known through reason and can be confirmed by experience, but does not need to be. Right? An example of this is going to be math. Right? We can know through pure reason that 2 plus 2 equals 4 on the basis of just the idea of succession, right? The smallest number possible is 0, having nothing, right? Having more than nothing gives you one thing, and then you can just go 2, right? The successor of 1 is 2, successor of 2 is 3, successor of 3 is 4, right? So addition is going to be 2 and 2 equals 4, right? It's pure logic, right? Because you can get to that by seeing that it's just the successor of the successor, right? So you have 2, it's the same function, basically. When I do this this lecture in class, I usually do a little bit of set theory, but that doesn't translate well without the visual aids of a whiteboard. But what I can do for this is we can do it this way, right? So you can learn numbers and addition without any reference to the outside world, right? But often it's something that can be confirmed through experience, right? We have 2 here and 2 here, right? If I move them over here, that gives us, I've added them, right? So we have 4. We always had 4, but the act of addition makes it obvious, right? By bringing it all together. Right? And that's what synthetic a priori is. It's something we can do by reason alone, but can confirm with experience. Right? It stands as sort of a middle ground between pure reason and experience alone. Right? And then finally, there is a posteriori reasoning. Right? It's going to be what is known through the senses or experience. Now, we can think of all of these 3 things as sort of like putting it in terms of architecture, right? Pure a priori, right, are going to be the categories, the faculties of the mind, right, and their relationship to each other. This is going to be the ground floor of a 2-story house, right? It's going to be the ground floor, and it's going to be the specific rooms and powers, right? And the rooms stand in a definitive relationship to each other. There's a set structure to these rooms, right? This is the mind. This is the basis of the mind, right? And then we have those powers that are built on top of it, right? Those powers that come from the interaction between these faculties, that are allowed by the interaction of these faculties, the existence of these faculties the way that these do. Right? And this is going to be the second story, or the synthetic a priori. It's built on reason and reason alone, right? But it's something that we can experience as well. Right? So we have the second floor of the building, of the house. There's not as much up there, not as many things or rooms on the second story as there are on the first, but it's dependent on there being a first story for there to be that second story. And then finally, we have experience. All the windows that lead to, that show what's outside of the house, that allow the house to have natural light come in to illuminate the various features and faculties. Right? Maybe even just like a skylight or a glass roof, glass ceiling. But right? So that's that lets light in, right? And you're going to have more light shine in clearly on the second story because it's higher up. It's closer to the sun, the source of light, that external world. So yeah, that's Kant.